What if the love you believe to be the greatest expression of freedom were actually one of the most subtle forms of imprisonment? Nietzsche never treated love as a pure, naive space elevated above life itself. For him, love is always traversed by the will to power, the need to dominate, to possess, to shape the other according to one's own measure. Romantic discourse teaches us that loving means surrender, but at its core what exists is a silent game of forces where one seeks to prevail over the other. How many times have you confused care with control, desire with ownership, faithfulness with fear? Love isn't a territory of freedom, but of constant tension, invisible disputes, emotional battles disguised as affection. To believe we love purely is to refuse to see the uncomfortable truth Nietzsche reveals to us. Love is always power. When we think about love, the first image that emerges is that of freedom. We say we love because we want to, because we choose to, because we feel something that arises from within us, without effort, without imposition, as if it were a breath of the soul. But Nietzsche invites us to distrust precisely this sensation of spontaneity. What we call free choice is, for the most part, nothing more than a constructed narrative to give meaning to our passions. Imagine two people who meet and claim to be living true love. At first glance, everything seems natural, as if destiny had placed one in the other's life. However, if we look deeper, we'll see that nothing there is truly free. Desire arises because the other corresponds to internal expectations, emotional needs, unconscious patterns we carry without realizing. We don't choose to love purely. We love because something within us demands recognition, security, pleasure, continuity. Love is born from needs, and needs are never free. Nietzsche said that life is will to power, and this will infiltrates everything. Even in the tenderest love exists a quest to dominate. When someone says, "I love you," they're almost always also saying, "Don't abandon me, be mine, give me what I need to feel complete." The phrase sounds liberating, but behind it lies a demand, an attempt to mold the other according to our desires. It's curious how we romanticize this dynamic. We call vigilance care. We call fear of loss faithfulness. We call what is fundamentally an attempt to imprison the other in our orbit surrender. It's harsh to admit, but the love we believe to be spontaneous is a stage where our deepest instincts perform a carefully disguised play. How many times have you heard someone say, "I can't choose who I like"? This phrase, repeated as proof of the heart's freedom, is actually the confession that there is no choice. We're dragged by invisible forces, by childhood memories, by cultural ideals, by patterns of attraction that govern us without our being able to decide. The love we call free is often the most well-accepted prison because we believe we entered it by our own will. Nietzsche doesn't invite us to despise love, but to see it without veils. It isn't the territory of freedom, but of necessity. It isn't a pure choice, but a vital impulse that dominates us. Recognizing this is painful because it destroys the romantic image we so much nurture. However, at the same time, it's liberating. Only when we see love as instinct and power can we stop deceiving ourselves with the promise of purity. If we look at daily life, we'll see this in small gestures. The couple that says they're together for love, but deep down they stay united by fear of loneliness. The person who declares love but demands constant proof, silent tests, immediate messages, as if love were only real if the other showed themselves submissive to their expectations. All this seems like care, but it's control. It seems like freedom, but it's dependence. Nietzsche would affirm that belief in love's freedom is just another moral invention to comfort us. We need to believe we choose, that we own our feelings, because the contrary idea frightens us. And so we create the illusion of pure, spiritual, elevated love. But the truth is that behind this spirituality, flesh always pulses. Necessity, the impulse of power. Deconstructing this illusion doesn't mean abandoning love, but entering it more consciously. When we stop believing we love freely, we begin to see the hidden games that compose our relationships. We see how we manipulate and are manipulated, how we ask for what we don't want to confess, how we offer affection while demanding devotion. Love stops being a fairy tale and becomes a brutal mirror, reflecting our fragilities and our desires for power. That's where true freedom begins, not in the illusion of pure love, but in the courage to see that even in the most romantic gesture exists a will to dominate. Only those who face this truth without fear can transform love into something more honest, less illusory, more human. Nietzsche reminds us that, fundamentally, all life is will to power. This means we don't live just to survive, but to expand our strength, to affirm our presence in the world, to influence and transform what surrounds us. Love, however much it's presented as a noble and altruistic feeling, doesn't escape this law. To love is largely a way of exercising power over the other. Think about how we relate. When someone says, "I want you," that declaration carries more than desire. It carries the impulse to possess, to make the other part of oneself, to mold their life in the image of our needs. We want the body, the time, the attention, the affections of the beloved person. We want exclusivity. We want priority. We want the other to recognize us as the center of their existence. This wanting is power in its pure state. Nietzsche makes us realize that love isn't simply a delicate emotion, but a vital strategy. In love, we seek security, continuity, guarantee against life's chaos. We want the other to be an anchor. And for this, we're willing to negotiate, manipulate, demand. Behind the gesture of tenderness exists the invisible contract. I give you this, but you must give me that. Love transforms into a power pact, where each one fights not to lose themselves, but also not to be dominated. Jealousy is perhaps the clearest example of this will to power disguised as affection. When we feel jealous, it's not just fear of losing the other, but fury at the possibility that someone else might occupy the space we judge ours by right. Jealousy reveals that love, more than surrender, is appropriation. It denounces the contradiction between the discourse of freedom and the reality of possession. We love, but we want the other to belong to us. Another example lies in idealization. Often we transform the one we love into a mirror of our expectations. We don't accept the other as they are, but as we'd like them to be. We try to polish them, mold them, educate them according to our desires, and we call this loving for their own good. But what we really seek is the exercise of our power, making the other an extension of our wills. Nietzsche would be relentless with this analysis. Even love's sweetness is traversed by force. When someone sacrifices themselves for their partner, when they give up something for love, they seem to be demonstrating altruism. However, this sacrifice is also power because it carries silent demands, the requirement of recognition, the mark of debt. How many times do apparently generous gestures transform later into accusations? I did so much for you. I left my life because of our love. Here we see the mask fall. Even loving sacrifice is a power strategy. In daily life, we can observe this game simply. One person waits for quick and constant messages from their partner, and if they don't come, feels betrayed. Another demands absolute exclusivity, as if love were a property contract. There are also those who, under the pretext of protecting, decide what the other can or cannot do. All this presents itself as care, but it's dominion. Nietzsche doesn't tell us this so we despise love, but so we aren't naive. The will to power is inevitable. It infiltrates all our relationships, all our bonds. The problem isn't that love is power. The problem is believing it isn't. Naivety makes us blind and vulnerable, makes us fall into manipulation games without realizing. When we recognize that loving is also wanting to dominate, we can begin to transform our way of loving. This doesn't mean eliminating power, which would be impossible, but living with consciousness. It means perceiving when we're trying to mold the other for our convenience, when we demand exclusivity as proof of love, when we ask for sacrifices in exchange for recognition. And upon perceiving, we can choose to act more honestly. Nietzsche, after all, wasn't a moralist. He wouldn't say that power in love is wrong. He simply reveals that love is traversed by forces we pretend not to see. If we have courage to look at them directly, perhaps we can love without illusions, without idealizations, accepting that even in the most caring gesture pulses the desire to dominate. Most of us learn to believe in romantic love as if it were a natural truth. From children's stories to popular songs, we're fed with the idea that there exists someone predestined, a soulmate, a lost half that completes us. This ideal presents itself as universal, as if inscribed in human nature itself. But Nietzsche provokes us to distrust. What if so-called romantic love were nothing but a cultural invention created to mold behaviors, control instincts, and maintain social order? Romantic love, as we know it, is a relatively recent construction. For centuries, marriages were economic alliances, political agreements, family arrangements. Love wasn't a priority. But as society transformed, the need arose to coat the relationship between man and woman with a higher ideal. It was necessary to domesticate sexual impulses, channel desires, give spiritual meaning to what was previously just instinct. Thus was born the myth of pure, eternal, disinterested love. Nietzsche would see in this a power mechanism of morality. Romantic love doesn't liberate, it imprisons. It convinces us we're free when, in truth, we're following a cultural script. When we believe in happy endings, in absolute faithfulness, in promises of eternity, we're just repeating narratives that were imposed on us. It's as if we were acting in a theater play written centuries ago, but believing the lines are ours. Think about how this idea shapes our lives. How many people endure unhappy relationships just because they believe true love demands sacrifice? How many blame themselves for no longer feeling passion, as if the problem were a personal failure and not the breaking of an illusion? Romantic love creates impossible expectations that the other complete us, save us, make us happy forever. And when reality doesn't correspond, we suffer not just for the relationship itself, but for the collapse of the myth that sustained it. Nietzsche unmasks this game by showing that love is never disinterested. Even in the romantic model, there's always desire for possession, will to power, need to mold the other. The difference is that now this power comes disguised as spirituality. We call noble what is essentially instinct. We idealize so as not to face the brutality of our desires. We create poetry, soap operas, promises, but underneath everything, flesh pulses demanding what belongs to it. A clear example lies in the promise of exclusivity. Romantic love teaches us that to love is to choose only one person for our entire life. But biologically and instinctively, our desire knows no such rigid limits. The body doesn't respect eternal contracts. So what do? We call any deviation betrayal, creating guilt, sins, and condemnations. Faithfulness, in this sense, isn't the fruit of freedom, but of morality that disciplines us, that forces us to deny our own impulses to fit the cultural mold. Nietzsche would laugh at the naivety of those who believe romantic love is liberating. For him, it's another mask of Christian morality, which tried to spiritualize instincts to control them. Passion was transformed into purity, desire into surrender, possession into devotion. And we, believing in these disguises, came to live relationships full of unreal expectations, demanding from the other what no human being could offer. Look at the relationships around you. How many suffer because they expect a perfect partner, always available, always faithful, always passionate? How many are disappointed when they discover that love isn't enough to erase differences, conflicts, and human limitations? The romantic myth sold us an impossible promise, and the consequence is frustration, resentment, guilt. Nietzsche doesn't ask us to abandon love, but to see its true nature. Romantic love is invention, it's theater, it's social construction. When we stop believing in it blindly, we open space to love more honestly. This doesn't mean living without passions, but living without illusions. It means recognizing that love is instinct and power, and that trying to transform it into spiritual purity is condemning ourselves to frustration. By dismantling the mask of romantic love, Nietzsche invites us to an exercise in courage, accepting that loving isn't finding the lost half, but facing the other as they are with their forces, their shadows, their wills. To love is to deal with power, not deny it in the name of a myth. Nietzsche said that the greatest prisons are those we don't recognize as such. Love, with its aura of freedom and purity, is one of these invisible prisons. We believe we're choosing, we believe we're living something spontaneous, but in reality, we're trapped by expectations, promises, and roles that were taught to us as natural. And most curious, we carry our chains with pride, calling them devotion, faithfulness, destiny. How many times have you heard that whoever loves remains forever? This promise of eternity seems beautiful, but it's also a trap. It imprisons us in a fixed idea that love only has value if it resists time, if it never changes, if it never wears out. This expectation becomes a prison because life, by nature, is movement, transformation, impermanence. We want love to defy the natural flow of things, and when it changes, we suffer not only for the loss, but for the sense of failure, as if we had betrayed a sacred ideal. Another subtle prison is that of absolute faithfulness. Society transformed exclusivity into the maximum proof of love. Thus, it's not enough to feel, care, share life. It's also necessary to guarantee that desire never escapes, never turns to another. But human desire is multiple, undisciplined, untamable. To demand that it bind itself forever to a single person is to impose a law against nature itself. We create thus an internal prison, the constant fear of betrayal, vigilant jealousy, anxiety before the possibility that the other might desire someone else. Nietzsche would say that love, under these conditions, becomes morality disguised as feeling. What we call respect is often fear. What we call care is often vigilance. What we call commitment is often obligation. Love stops being encounter and becomes contract, with rigid clauses, silent punishments, and constant demands. The prison isn't imposed by iron bars, but by invisible expectations we carry within us. In daily life, these prisons appear in small gestures. The partner who demands explanations for each outing, justifying themselves with the phrase, "It's because I care." The person who feels guilty for no longer feeling the same intensity as before, believing something is wrong with them. The couple that remains together only for fear of social judgment, hiding unhappiness under the mask of stability. In all these cases, love functions as a decorated cell, beautiful on the outside, suffocating on the inside. But why do we accept this prison so easily? Nietzsche would answer, because it gives us meaning. Human beings fear emptiness, fear loneliness, fear uncertainty. Love, even in its imprisoning form, offers security. The promise of eternity, idealized faithfulness, the stability of a social role, everything protects us from life's chaos. We prefer meaningful prison to freedom without guarantees. Thus, we carry chains as if they were crowns. The danger, however, is that this prison kills love itself. What should be living encounter becomes dead obligation. What should be life's celebration transforms into demands. Love, which was born as vital impulse, ends up domesticated, disciplined, transformed into burden. The result is resentment, wear, frustration. We want the other to give us freedom, but we demand they live imprisoned in our expectations. It's an inevitable contradiction. Nietzsche invites us to see this prison not to destroy it completely, but so we can live love with consciousness. To love without illusions is to accept that the other doesn't belong to us, that desire cannot be controlled, that life is made of changes. It's recognizing that eternal promises are beautiful, but always fragile before time. It's learning to be with someone not because a moral rule obliges us, but because, in that instant, there's true choice, real presence. When we perceive love as invisible prison, we can begin to open its doors. Not to abandon who is beside us, but to transform the relationship into something less suffocating, more honest. Freedom, in this case, isn't in living without bonds, but in living bonds without chains. Nietzsche didn't write romantic treatises, but his philosophy offers us lenses to observe love in its rawest form. When we apply his ideas to daily life, we perceive that relationships that seem normal to us almost always hide power games. It's in day-to-day life, in the simplest gestures, that truth about love appears. Think of a couple who has lived together for years. They say they're united by love, but silently both carry an invisible notebook of debits and credits. I did this for you, so you owe me that. Affection mixes with demands. Generosity transforms into currency of exchange. What seems like care is often veiled negotiation, a way to guarantee power over the other. Another example, surveillance. How many couples live based on sent and received messages, quick responses, likes on social networks? The discourse is always the same. It's because I care. It's because I miss you. But under this pretext, suffocating control is installed. Love becomes an invisible guard, monitoring steps, words, silences. Jealousy, which many still consider proof of love, is actually the clearest expression of the will to possess. Nietzsche helps us see that even the most romantic gestures can carry a shadow. A declaration of love can be a way of demanding reciprocity. I said I love you, now you must say it too. A gift can be less an act of generosity and more a way of creating emotional debt. Even the idea of caring for the other can transform into manipulation. I know what's best for you, follow what I say. Love, in this sense, is a stage for emotional blackmail disguised as affection. In homes, we see another aspect of this power, the invisible division of roles. How many times does one partner assume control of financial life, while the other accepts, believing this is a sign of responsibility? Or when one person decides the family's direction, daily choices, and the other yields, calling this harmony. On the surface, everything seems balanced, but what exists is hierarchy. And the more we convince ourselves this hierarchy is natural, the deeper the prison becomes. Nietzsche would say it's in this normality that illusion dwells. We think loving is repeating what everyone does, but what we repeat are power structures we inherited without questioning. The romantic myth reinforces these structures, making us believe that exclusivity, jealousy, surveillance, and dependence are signs of love, when in truth they're forms of domination. And what about the phrase "love conquers all"? This belief, so widespread, makes many endure painful situations in the name of the promise that someday everything will get better. People remain in abusive relationships because they believe sacrifice is proof of love. They accept humiliations, disrespect, subtle or explicit violence, convinced that suffering is part of the bond's greatness. Here we see love used as justification for submission. One person's power affirms itself in the other's fragility, and both call this destiny. Nietzsche alerts us to the need to look at these examples without veils. It's not about saying love is a lie, but recognizing that in each gesture there's a struggle of forces. Care can be generous, but also controlling. Faithfulness can be conscious choice, but also fear and dependence. Passion can be authentic encounter, but also search for possession. The same gesture that warms can imprison. The same embrace that comforts can suffocate. Fundamentally, what Nietzsche proposes is that we stop idealizing. Love isn't purity, nor freedom, nor salvation. It's instinct, will, power. It's a struggle of forces dressed as tenderness, and if we have courage to face this truth, we can love less naively and more honestly. Look at your own life. How many times have you called love what was fear of being alone? How many times have you accepted surveillance and control because it seemed like care? How many times have you confused dependence with passion? These questions don't serve to condemn, but to illuminate. Loving isn't wrong, but deceiving ourselves about what love really is can imprison us for an entire lifetime. Nietzsche doesn't offer us consolation, but clarity. If until now we've seen that love is traversed by instincts of possession, by power games and invisible prisons, the inevitable question arises, is there some form of liberation? Is it possible to love without falling into the traps of the freedom myth, without being trapped by romanticism's illusions, without transforming the other into property? For Nietzsche, the answer isn't in denying love, nor in dreaming of non-existent purity, but in learning to face its real nature. To liberate oneself isn't to erase the will to power, but to recognize it. To love consciously means admitting that the impulse to dominate is present in us and in the other, and that ignoring it only makes us more imprisoned. The first key to this liberation is honesty. Not the superficial honesty of sweet words, but the courage to admit the hidden games that exist in every relationship. To recognize when care is control, when sacrifice is demands, when faithfulness is fear. This sincerity doesn't destroy love. On the contrary, it prevents it from being corroded by illusion. The second key is abandoning the myth of completeness. Romantic love taught us that the other should complete us, that without them we are halves, broken pieces awaiting unity. Nietzsche rejects this idea. The strong human being for him is one who doesn't seek salvation in the other, but who affirms themselves. Love, in this case, isn't lack, but overflow. It isn't begging for affection, but sharing strength. Those who love consciously don't look in the other for the lost half, but find in them an ally in life's exercise. The third key is accepting love's ephemeral character. Promises of eternity sound beautiful, but they imprison. Life is movement, and love, like everything human, is subject to wear, change, ending. Recognizing this doesn't diminish its value. On the contrary, it intensifies it. To love knowing it can end is to love more fully, because one doesn't live on illusions, but on the real presence of the instant. Nietzsche would call this amor fati, loving destiny, loving life as it is, with its impermanences. In daily life, this liberation translates into new attitudes. It means not suffocating the other with surveillance, but trusting without illusions. It means not demanding faithfulness as a contract, but living exclusivity as free choice that can change. It means not using love as an excuse to manipulate, but as space to share forces. It means accepting that loving isn't controlling, but walking alongside, knowing the other doesn't belong to us. Of course, this path isn't simple. It requires detachment, courage, and above all, the capacity to bear truth without masks. It's much easier to believe in the fairy tale of romantic love or accept the invisible prison of social promises than to face love as a struggle of forces. But it's exactly this courage that Nietzsche proposes, not living on illusions even if it hurts, To love without the freedom myth doesn't mean living without love, but loving more lucidly. It means transforming power into consciousness, possession into presence, fear into acceptance. It means looking at the other not as medicine for our lacks, but as a companion in existence's adventure. Love, thus, stops being prison and becomes encounter of forces that recognize and respect each other. Nietzsche never promised comfort. His philosophy is an invitation to strength, to the courage of living without illusions. In love's field, this courage frees us from naivety and opens us to truer love, not because it's pure, but because it's human, imperfect, traversed by power, but lived with consciousness. Here then is liberation, not believing in the myth of free love, but accepting love as it is instinct, struggle, will. Not seeking salvation in it, but learning to love without deceiving ourselves. Those who dare live this way discover that freedom isn't in idealized love, but in themselves when looking at love without veils. We've reached the end of this journey, and perhaps the greatest discovery is this: love was never what they taught us. It isn't purity, nor freedom, nor salvation. It's instinct, it's struggle, it's will to power. And recognizing this doesn't mean killing love, but freeing it from the illusions that suffocate it. Nietzsche invites us to love without masks, to accept that love is human, imperfect, full of shadows, but still profoundly transformative. Throughout these chapters, we've seen how the illusion of freedom, the romantic myth, invisible prisons and daily blackmail reveal how much love is a field of forces where desire and power intertwine. True liberation isn't in denying this, but in living consciously, without letting ourselves be imprisoned by narratives we inherited. Which city are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know. If this philosophical exploration resonated with you in any way, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join our community that dares to face life without illusions.